This is a workshop for applicants to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation's Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund. All right, we still have people joining, but we do want to get things kicked off with a kickoff poll. So this is an opportunity for all attendees in the room to open up the polling device that we will be using for today's workshop. So if you would all either take out another device or go to another browser and open pollev.com/cleanwater378. And by typing that in or putting that into the browser or your on your phone, that will bring up the polling device that we're going to be using throughout the duration of today's workshop. So we'd like you to bring that up. Again, it's on the screen in front of you. You should see that. So you can also grab it from the chat box. We have Ola Imani Davis working as our behind the scenes tech host, and she will be putting some of this information into the chat box, including that link for the poll. So if you would take a minute to answer the question, how many NFWF Chesapeake program grant applications have you submitted over the last 10 years? So I look forward to seeing some responses to that. And once all attendees go into the poll and hit, select join, and then you should see that poll come up with the question. Let's see. And I have some work to do here on my end while you're doing your work. Okay. All right, very good. It looks like we have a number of people in our room today, in the workshop today, who are newcomers to the Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund Grants Program. So I am excited to share, we're all excited to share information for newcomers, and we're also excited to share, maybe highlight some new things for folks who have been past subscribers to the Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund Grants Program. So it looks like we have a good number of people that have submitted a number of grants to the program. Terrific. All right. Thank you very much. I am now going to move to the next slide. Thank you for that input on our kickoff poll. And I'm going to advance to the next slide. Okay, before we get going, I just want to review the housekeeping regulations or rules for the session today. The session is being recorded and will be shared. Attendees will be muted by the host. And if you choose to, please update your name and your pronoun with your preferred pronoun and organizations. And you do this by hovering over your image, and that will come up and it will prompt you to select rename and then prompt you to enter the information that you prefer to use. If you have technical issues during today's program, please message the host in the chat box. I mentioned that Ola Imani Davis is working behind the scenes and she can address technical issues. In addition, if you have general questions that come up during the session, we're going to kind of run through the program with the presentations, and then we're going to have a Q&A, some time for Q&A at the end. If you have questions that arise throughout the workshop, feel free to insert those into the Zoom chat. You can also use the Whova Q&A if you're on the Whova platform. So, okay, let's keep going here. Our team for today's workshop, we've got a really strong team. I'm happy to have by my side and supporting this workshop. Jake Riley is the Director of Chesapeake Bay Programs, Stephanie Heidbreder, Manager of Chesapeake Bay Programs. Nicole Thompson is Coordinator of the Northeast Region for Chesapeake Bay, for the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. And then we also have field liaisons. I've introduced myself. I'm Liz Feinberg. I work as a contracted field liaison, and I work with Calvan Environmental. We also have Katie Olmbowski with Woods and Water, Christian Sucky Blunk with Headwaters LLC, who's the longest time, the most senior of our field liaisons. So we've got a strong leader with Kristen. With Kristen Hughes Evans with Sustainable Chesapeake, another member of our field liaison team, and Dave Hirschman with Hirschman Water and LLC. And Dave works out of Charlottesville, Kristen Hughes Evans out of Richmond, Kristen Sucky Blanc out of Harpers Ferry, Katie up here in Pennsylvania, and I am also based up in Pennsylvania. And then also part of our workshop team is as our facilitator, as I've mentioned. All right, we've got one more poll just to, again, get us going here. Hopefully you're feeling comfortable with the poll that we're using. And Kristen Saki-Blanc is bringing up the poll. So we would like to hear from you at this very early part of, at the start of our workshop. What do you think makes a good proposal? So in a single word or a short phrase, please just enter your thoughts. Excellent. I'm glad to see where people are able to navigate pollev.com. And again, if you came to the workshop late, please look at the chat box for a link to the polling device that we'll be using for today's workshop. All right, what do you think makes a good proposal? Clarity. I'm just going to read some of the responses that should be appearing in front of you. Innovative, story, objectives, assumptions, innovative, straightforward. Okay, those are some good responses. And we'll see how your thinking may evolve as our workshop progresses. All right, good, thank you. All right, now I'm gonna go to the next slide. All right, what we hope you'll get from today's session are insights for building successful proposals that will increase your chances of getting your project funded. We also expect that you'll gain practice thinking through key elements and characteristics of a competitive National Fish and Wildlife Project proposal. The agenda for our workshop today, we've essentially broken it up into two main sections. We'll first hear from Jake Riley with the foundation, with the funder's perspective, kind of helping applicants and prospective grantees select the best grant lane for your project. And then Jake will set us up for a discussion led by the field liaisons with a field perspective. And field liaisons will share perspective insights and tips on building a competitive project and proposal. And then finally, the last 10 minutes will be set aside for hearing from you with questions. We'll also have an opportunity. We also want to share with you an opportunity to sign up for office hours, and we'll be providing contact information. So that is our workshop, that is our agenda for the workshop. And now I would like to move into the first act of our workshop with Jake Riley leading the way. We've got Jake here on the call. And I introduced Jake already. Stephanie and Nicole are members of his team, but Jake's going to lead this discussion right now. Take it away.
Thank you so much, Liz. Really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining here. Well, actually, maybe go back one slide there, Liz, if you're steering one. Just wanted to quickly, let you all know we are friendly, approachable faces all here at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. We certainly know there are funders out there who have reputations as being a little bit more of a black box and those kinds of things. I actually don't have any specific ones in mind. I just know that that can be the case. But I think for us at the foundation, we really do enjoy and are eager to talk with individuals about project ideas, project proposals. So really any one of us is a great contact here for our programs. We also have a great team that Liz referenced there, our field liaisons who sort of live and breathe in our program to be a little bit of a step removed. We know that for a variety of reasons, folks might want to chew on an idea with an expert in the field or an expert in our programs before coming to us with it, but certainly just want to encourage folks to feel free to reach out to myself, Stephanie, or Nicole at any point if you want to talk about project ideas or have questions on the program. Go to the next slide. Perfect. So, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has been involved in supporting Chesapeake Bay restoration work for over 20 years now. The foundation of that work is really a relationship that we have been able to develop and cultivate with the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. They provide sort of the core set of funding for our programs, but we also leverage resources from a bunch of other federal agencies, including USDA and Department of the Interior. And have really grown our impact. I think we're now over maybe $400 million in terms of total impact when you combine our funding and sort of the local match that's on the landscape. So we are always looking at our partners to evolve and grow as we have ourselves. There's a whole history in terms of where we've gone with these, where we've been with these programs, where we are and sort of where we're growing. But one of the things we also really like to do is see our grantees in the grant community evolve and develop skills and acumen and grow impact over time. And that includes things like improving your proposal quality. So really happy that y'all are joining us here today. So just a quick hit on our priorities, because as a grant funder, and we have our goals and objectives, and really need to understand how your individual proposal really does fit with those. I should just mention really quickly that I direct our Chesapeake Bay work. We have a number of national grants programs that do have some potential eligibility and a footprint here in the Bay region. I'm just going to be talking specifically to our programs, but similarly, if folks have any, come across any NFWF programs that really aren't in that specific Chesapeake Bay lane, myself and my staff can be excellent resources to help you connect up with some of those folks as well. But as it relates to our Chesapeake work here, really want to orient folks to this Chesapeake Bay business plan. And it is our blueprint of what we want to fund and why. And it really clearly articulates the goals and objectives we're trying to hit with these programs. Not surprisingly, I mentioned our partnership with US EPA and the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership. So many of our quantitative goals and outcomes and associated strategies are really built around the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And principal among those is improving water quality, largely speaking in the non-point source space, and so in the ag and the urban context. We are a Fish and Wildlife Foundation, so we are all keenly interested in restoring and protecting key species and their habitats, and increasingly both to sort of get the scale of work we need on the landscape, but also to sustain and enhance that work through time. We are keenly interested in fostering an engaged and diverse citizen and stakeholder network that is out there on the landscape, engaging, identifying project opportunities, pitching in, and then of course, doing things like maintaining those projects over time. So even if we don't have an active RFP, would encourage folks to visit NFWF.org/Chesapeake. We got a bunch of resources there, but would specifically point folks to our business plan as kind of a steady state of what our priorities are. Taking sort of a next step down, underneath that Chesapeake Bay Stewardship Fund that sets our goals for the entire watershed, really across any and all programs that we have operating in support of that. Currently, we have two primary programs, one of which has sort of a two-track approach. So just wanted to kind of orient folks to our existing programs now. We'll also walk through a couple exercises to kind of test you a little bit in terms of what you think might be sort of a good fit in terms of an idea to which program. So our two basic programs are our small watershed grants and our innovative nutrient sediment reduction grants program. Actually, starting from the right side of things, our innovative nutrient sediment reduction grants program is sort of what we consider sort of our Cadillac sort of water quality program. And these are grants up to $1 million that are really focusing on delivering proven water quality best management practices at increasing scales, both geographically, the quantity of BMPs that we're getting in place, the time at which it takes to do it, the cost, right? And more specifically, we've really kind of pivoted this innovative program really over the last 5 to 6 years. We used to kind of focus soup to nuts on things like innovation. We're really increasingly thinking about innovation in the context of partnerships and collaboratives. So as we look at this innovative program, we're looking for big scale projects that are delivering BMPs at multiple scales, right, through the work of partnerships and collaboratives as sort of the mechanism to kind of saturate the landscape, right, with practices. On the smaller side of things, right, but not equally as important is our small watershed grants program. So our small watershed grants program is actually broken out into sort of two sort of levels or two tiers. At the end of the day, the key distinction between our innovative program and the small watershed program is that the small watershed program is able to and does much more than just water quality. So it might be species and habitat work that doesn't have a direct water quality nexus. It might be other outcomes in the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement that aren't directly tied into the TMDL. So things like oyster restoration, for example. It's also a really terrific program to really start to build out things like community and citizen engagement. And so with that small watershed grants program, we have two, like I said. We have a planning and technical assistance track that is really aimed at enhancing local capacity to basically identify and in the future implement good on the ground projects. So that could include anything from assessment, planning, design, other technical assistance kind of activities that look to get local communities and local partners to a place where they might then be able to take that next step in the future to implement some projects on the ground. Our small watershed grants implementation track is then a great place for that next step, right? The implementation track is really where we are looking for projects that are delivering on the ground actions that protect and restore water quality, species, or habitat. So you could think about the planning and technical assistance as kind of the kind of the initial steps of sort of thinking about a watershed, thinking about a potential project. The implementation track is a really great place to come to actually fund the implementation, as well as things like continued outreach and planning. I think that work can certainly fit under this implementation track. The key is just that with that implementation track, we need to see some sort of demonstrable on the ground improvements. So it's really important for folks to choose the right funding program. We try very hard to make sure that folks don't spin their wheels on an application that does not at least have eligibility and have a decent fit with our program. So another great place to talk to myself or any of the field liaisons here. So we're going to go through a little bit of an exercise to kind of test out sort of maybe you can sort of hear and see a little bit how we might think about sort of conceiving of a project, right? So let's conceive of a project that's water quality and habitat focused or habitat focused. And there's a need for a specific plan or approach. You got to prioritize which practice or intervention. You might need to do some community outreach, right? Which program might that be? That's a great example for our small watershed planning and technical assistance grant, right? So there's this ultimate water quality or habitat sort of end goal, but we need to kind of do some work at the outset to maybe figure out where within a community might be the best or most cost-efficient places to reduce stormwater management, or given the specific species that we're really looking to support, what kinds of practices or what kinds of interventions might be sort of best given the place that we're looking at. Now, if your project is, again, a water quality and or habitat focused, that's going to be a consistent sort of theme here. And you got your shovels out, you're ready to hit the ground, you've got sort of, places identified or getting towards identifying places on the ground where you really want to kind of do that implementation work. Again, that implementation grants program is going to be a great track under the small watershed program. Now, taking things up a scale, right? And I kind of cheated a little bit there, but let's say your project has multiple partners and you're really kind of, at least working through an existing, if even loose sort of collaborative or partnership to sort of connect up, to sort of understand what you need to do in a place and really start to scale that up. And let's say those partners have an agreed upon path to really kind of, like I said, scale up the water quality practices in place. You've got some good legs under you. You know where you need to go. You're starting to put the financial packages in place to be able to get that work done, right? But you see that there are new ways or opportunities to kind of accelerate the way that the team works together, right? And then as an associated outcome, really continue to scale and build those BMPs at bigger and quicker scales. That's a perfect fit for our innovative nutrient and sediment reduction grants program. So we'll do, this is more of sort of like the kind of the pop quiz, let's say, part of this presentation here. So we're going to ask sort of, go through an exercise, which grants program would you select based on this scenario? So let's say we have, we're working with a farmer in a watershed. Their livestock have partial stream access. So they're only partially fenced out of the stream. We all know if you don't, here's some education, we certainly want to get those cows out of the stream for water quality, herd health benefits, stream health benefits. So the cows currently don't have full exclusion, but the landowner here, and it's a single landowner, is interested in improving the riparian buffer by planting trees and installing other conservation practices. So we've got someone with an opportunity to do some additional livestock fencing work, an interest in buffer work, and maybe some other conservation practices on farm. And oh, by the way, they're also potentially interested in putting their farm into a conservation easement so that we can get long-term water quality benefits. That's a great example of a small watershed implementation grants program, right? It's got the water quality flavor that we would need to see in that innovative program. It isn't really talking a lot about sort of needing the planning work done. I mean, certainly planning and technical assistance could be a part of this, but sort of the vision is to get the practices in place. And really importantly, it's like a single farm, right? So when we think about sort of scale here, another way to think about the implementation grants program on the small watershed side of things, it's great for kind of a showcase restoration project, a single site, a single farm, for example. Nope, you can go ahead. So our next scenario here. So let's say, and I wouldn't be surprised if it doesn't look like NCTC. Oh no, it's Loudoun County there. So we have a watershed group that's interested in protecting sort of a high quality trout stream in their watershed. The township, that it sits in and that it drains from is interested in water quality protection, but really doesn't kind of understand or have a good sense of how it kind of fits with some of their local priorities. So the township and the watershed group want to develop an action plan that'll help to sort of guide both the watershed group's sort of work to protect the stream, also really help to figure out what the local government's sort of role and opportunity is, and to continue to coordinate work moving forward. So this is a great example of a potential planning and technical assistance grant, right? Allow those partners to get around the table, do some research and analysis, develop some plans that then can be funded with a future NFWF grant, state grant, local funding, those kinds of things.
Hey, Jake, we're going to pull up a poll next. So everybody get your phones or your devices ready. Thanks, Jake. Want to kind of lead folks through this scenario, and then we'll get some poll responses.
Sure, yeah. So here's where we put you all to the test here. So here we have a watershed that is actually situated at the juncture of 3 counties. So it's got a watershed that's kind of draining 3 sort of separate, government units. Lots of extensive urban land use kind of in that watershed. Nearly all of the streams are impaired in that watershed. Things like TSS, so lots of sediment coming in, salinity from road salts, and then excess nutrients, whether it's from human or animal sources and pet waste things, right, for example. So officials across these counties are really interested in kind of getting together and undertaking a whole watershed approach. They kind of get that we can't be going at this alone. We're all trying to sort of repair this watershed. So we need to really kind of get together, over and above whatever level of existing coordination that we have, and partner with some of our municipal leaders and civic groups in each one of our counties to sort of get that plan in place and really start to scale the work really through things like stormwater retrofits, installing green infrastructure on properties, planting large trees to increase tree canopy, and maybe doing a little bit of, let's say, urban nutrient management with businesses and households across those 3 counties. So the question here, I think, if Liz is going to point, is which program do we think is going to be the best fit here? And Liz, correct me if I'm wrong, but go ahead.
Perfect, Jake. Thanks. So just in just a couple seconds, please, just considering that scenario, just enter into the poll device and decide, or you select which grant lane you think that scenario would best align with. Don't think too hard. And then Jake will we'll wrap this poll up in just a minute once we get some responses. So make a recommendation. Okay, here we go. All right, very good. Thanks for those responses. Okay. Good.
This is all very good. And listen, I think, and I'm kind of shooting us in the foot here. To a certain extent, there's no wrong answer, right? I mean, we have programs that can do a lot, but I would certainly think about this project as being one that could certainly be a candidate for our innovative program. There are certainly planning elements that could be a part of that. There is implementation, so depending on the scale, it could fit with that small watershed implementation grants, but it's a great example of a potential ready-made INSR project for our program. So with that, I will shut up and let my experts, field liaisons, take the show here.
I didn't want to cut you off, but it's just like that's a perfect opportunity. Looking at that scenario, there could be other options. Most folks indicated INSR, but if you have questions about it, the point here is to think about it. Reach out to the NFWF staff team, the NFWF team, and the field liaison team. So it's not always obvious, and it's worthy of a good conversation with one of the team members. So thank you very much, Jake. I'm going to move us along here in our workshop, and we're going to bring up our field liaison team. So I've already introduced us in some detail, and we're going to the next kind of 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to hear from Dave Hirschman and Kristen Saki-Blanc, who will walk us through some discussion about planning, project planning, and some kind of a deeper dive into developing and crafting proposals. So take it away, Dave.
Thanks very much, Liz. That's really great lead up to going from the staff to the field liaisons. And we're so happy to be here and so happy you're here. And what we're going to talk about is our experience as field liaisons, just working across the watershed. So many different ideas, great organizations, great people. So what does it take to turn that into a winning proposal? What I want to stress is all the work that has to happen or should happen before the RFP comes out. Once the RFP hits the street, it's a big scramble. You got to get the partners and the letters and the budgets and all that we'll talk about here in a bit. But you got to kind of already have something going before that happens, especially partnerships and relationships. And we've all been in this game for a while, and we know it's all about relationships. So the heart of the project, which hopefully you have some thought and some action and some relationships to articulate the partners, the place, and the purpose. The partners is perhaps the most important element of this. And you think about what you want to achieve in a watershed. Who do you need to be on your team to do that? And how does what is the partnership? And very importantly, how do the partners collaborate? What do they do? What tasks does each have? What are the strengths that each partner can bring to make it a true collaboration? The second is the place and the scale of the place. Is it a small watershed? As the previous example was, I think 3 counties, so that's a much bigger geography. It could be as big as the James River watershed, or it could be as small as a sub-watershed of a couple hundred acres. So that's going to be a very important decision. Where can your partnership have the greatest impact? And even as the cows thing was a specific site. So that's going to be a very important consideration. And in fact, that's going to translate to the number of partners that are probably going to be involved. And you should be kind of working to put that together well ahead of the RFP coming out. The final P in our 3 Ps here, partners, place, and purpose, is what specifically will your project aim to do? What interventions, if you know what the problems of the watershed are with regard to water quality and habitat or both, what are the interventions that will really make a difference at that scale that you're choosing to work with your partners? And making the priorities. And these are the 3 Ps. So I think if you give some thought to the 3 Ps, you're really going to be in a great position when proposal season comes around. So I think, Liz, you're going to do a poll at this point, another one?
Yeah, please, if you would, just real quickly, what do you think now? What do you think reviewers consider important for a good proposal? So just to keep you all on your toes, we just want to sprinkle a couple of these poll questions throughout. If you would just enter your responses, and then we're going to kind of quickly move on to Kristen Saki-Blanc. Thank you, Dave.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Future planning after project ends. Hi, Kristen Saki-Blanc here. What are the reviewers looking for when they're reading your proposals? Cost effectiveness, clear objectives and scale of project. People, who are the partners that are carrying it out? Prior planning, looking for the environmental impact and benefit, a clear scope of work and anticipated results and partners. That's great thinking. I'd like to just encourage you to keep thinking down that line, because sometimes what we think is a good proposal as we're writing it and may not fit completely with what the reviewers are looking for, because the reviewers are looking very specifically for the criteria that are listed in the request for proposals. So as we're thinking about your proposal sitting in front of a review team, you got to remember those reviewers are looking at a lot of proposals. They've got a lot of tough decisions to make, because Jake and NFWF and his team are saying we've got this much money to spend, and we've got to make some breaks here, and some good projects may not get funding. So it's really important that you need to make yours as understandable as possible, that you're clear, that, thank you, Liz. And that your proposal, that it's understandable. That's a really important piece, because sometimes we all get caught up in talking about the jargon of our particular area of expertise or interest, and we're forgetting that the reviewers are experts, but they're coming from a lot of different places of expertise. So you've got to be able to explain it. If you don't explain it well, then the reviewer is going to say, well, if I can't understand what's on the paper, maybe this project isn't ready for prime time. It needs to be able to convey what the heart of your project is. Now, in the proposal,
I just want to make sure, is the screen visible?
Yeah,
Is it-
it's visible now. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
Yeah,
Oops.
that's all right. So one of the front doors to your proposal, and NFWF gives you, you know, a template that they ask you to fill out. Some of it's online, some of it's on a you know, doc, a Microsoft doc that you're building your narrative. But the front door to your proposal, the very first thing that the reviewer is going to read is your project description. So you've got to make sure that that front door is a place that you're making it very clear what it is that you want to do. And we have on this slide just a cutout of the tip sheet that NFWF provides for all of its grants programs. And the tip sheets are golden because they really give you the specific nuggets of that proposal that you need to pay attention to. So the second piece, if you could go back, Liz, real quickly, the second piece is that building your project objectives is a very important place to be clear. We're not saying that it's not important in other parts of your proposal, but these two places are where we're going to focus for this discussion. Go ahead. And so there's three basic practices that you want to use, and these are the same practices that all of us were talking about in the 5th and 6th grade, is that you want to use simple, precise, declarative statements that anybody can understand. You know, and we all want to show off what we know and use the buzzwords, and it's fine to have it in there, but make it clear. You want to use specific and concrete language to state what you're going to do. Don't explain it away, meaning don't try to give all the background so that you're, you know, saying why. And thirdly, you want to make sure that you're using these statements consistently through the proposal. So your project description is a great initial look. Your objectives are mirroring that. And go on to the next one. So we've got an example of parsing out the language for a project description. Using those three practices, you want to state what your action is. You want to say where it's going to occur, and you want to tell what the outcome is. And before you click forward, Liz, let me just say the project description is a 2-sentence project description. So it's really important that you pull these elements in because, again, it's your front door. So in the example that we have here from Frederick County, Virginia, we've got an organization, I think Dave called it the Big Cow Conservation Alliance, will, you see in orange, install conservation practices and buffer. There's your action. The where it's going to occur on 3 family dairy farms within the Redbud Run portion of the Opequon Creek Watershed in Frederick County, Virginia. And the outcome is that we're going to get these manure injection practices installed, manure storage structures, and we're going to improve the riparian buffers. Those outcomes are going to lead us to a water quality improvement. Go ahead. So likewise with the project objectives, objectives, usually you have several in your proposal. They're a single statement that builds out, here are the sections of our proposal that we're going to say, here's the specific action we're going to take, here's going to be who takes it, and here are the results that this objective is going to provide. So the first objective, and this goes back to the Big Cow Alliance, Conservation Alliance, the Soil and Water Conservation District will, action, update its existing conservation plans. By whom? Really, it's the Soil Water Conservation District with the 3 dairy farmers, and help them to enroll in NRCS programs so that they can implement enhanced nutrient management practices. Those are the results we're looking for. And the second objective for this same project, the riparian buffer is going to be restored and expanded by the project team, and they're going to result in improving filtering function and increase the width. So one of the take homes from this segment is that you're building out your proposal utilizing these devices to kind of show consistency throughout the whole proposal, because for each objective that you build for building your project, you have a work plan that corresponds to the objective where you parse out the task, you parse out what each partner is taking within that task, you parse out when they're going to have it done by, either the time frame or the end date, and then you show kind of the deliverable that task provides that leads you to fulfilling the objective that you stated. So we're going to move into breakout groups now, And in the breakout groups, we're all going to be in small groups, and each of the 5 field liaisons who are on the call today with us are going to be in a group there just as a partner with you to think about how to build a broad project description. We're going to, again, look for you to state the action, where it's occurring, the outcome. This is just, it's not a technical exercise. You don't have to be an authority in this particular scenario that we're going to provide you. It's just an exercise to help us clearly think about how we articulate and be effective in building our project description. So there's no right or wrong. This is just a team exercise. And the scenario that we're basing this on is the local watershed organization has identified several areas along an impaired stream that would benefit from improved riparian buffers. Currently, there are invasive plants, there are bare soils in the floodplain, but several of the municipalities in the area are interested in expanded buffers and increasing community education, and they really want people to understand how buffers help improve water quality. And they've got a bonus local business who's really gung-ho to help pay for some larger trees. So when we go into our breakout groups, you'll have this scenario in front of you. We're going to do a quick round of introductions, and our field liaisons are there to talk with you to walk through the exercise. Is there anything to add to that, Liz?
No, thanks, Kristen. That was perfect. Thank you. Ola will put us in breakout rooms now, so hold tight, and you should land in a breakout room with the field liaison.
The number of people reached, of course, in the metrics section. Okay, I advocated for 10 minutes, and 10 minutes was not enough.
We had a good discussion, is what I just said while I was on mute, and now I'm going to bring the presentation back up. So we'd like to hear from you. Kristen Saki-Blanc, feel free to turn your mic off. But so basically, we just wanted to hear, what did you notice by doing this exercise? Was it easy, difficult? And you can just waterfall responses in the chat box. We're not going to execute a poll here. So just generally, what did you notice by doing this exercise? We had a strong team in my breakout room, so I appreciated hearing folks' input. All right, I think we need to keep moving, so I am trying to do what I need to do on my end, and we now will be moving into insights and tips for better proposals. And we have Kristen Hughes-Evans and Katie Olmbowski, and I'm going to turn it over to Kristen Hughes-Evans. Thanks again for your participation in the breakout, folks. Kristen, take yourself off mute, please.
Thank you so much for the reminder. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the introduction, Liz. I'm going to talk to you, and then Katie and I are both going to talk to you about areas of challenge and opportunity in the area of budgets, how to develop a cost-effective proposal, matching funds, discussion of co-benefits, as well as long-term maintenance. Next slide, please. So a lot of times when people think about a project budget, they're like, oh, this is the boring, the hard part of proposal development. But I really want to encourage you to think about it as an extension of the story that your project is telling about what you all are going to do. So we just talked about like the what, the who, the where, and the outcomes, and your budget can help highlight all of that. So for example, like with the who, your budget should include an individual line for each of your staff members, for example, and you may not have time in your proposal to talk about like why your staff is so great, but you do have a small narrative section in that budget. So in addition to talking about here's what they're going to do, here's how many hours they're going to spend, maybe a sentence about here's why we selected them to do it, because they have experience in this. So all of this budget narrative stuff, my point is going to accentuate and further justify your project. Can you go back one, please? Oh, no, you're right. Go forward. I'm done. Okay. So I want to give you a couple insider tips here. The budget is also an opportunity to talk about authentic partnerships. So Kristen and Dave emphasize the importance of partnerships, and you want your budget to show that the funding is being allocated equitably to those partners. Like, for example, let's just do an extreme case. Let's say, Watershed organization talks about all these partners, but absolutely none of them are getting any funding in the budget. So how is that partnership really working? So not that every partner might need funding in the budget, but this is your opportunity to really emphasize that partnership component of your project. The other thing I want to mention is if you plan or would like to consider doing monitoring, you will need to do a quality assurance program plan. And those do take time. And so you want to make sure that your budget includes staff or partner time to develop that QAPP. So now I want to talk about cost effectiveness. So unsurprisingly, NFWF is looking for cost effective projects, right? So you want to talk about cost effectiveness in your proposal narrative as well as in the budget. But there is some nuances here, right? So for example, like perhaps a community that you're working with really wants to see one green infrastructure project that might not be the most cost effective, but they're choosing it because it has other co-benefits. That's fine. Just talk about those other co-benefits in your project. And the proposal's another opportunity to talk about like why you've selected these projects. Are they the most cost effective? And if not, why were they considered? The other point I want to make is that when it comes to cost effectiveness, people developing urban proposals should know that NFWF is seeking both urban green infrastructure and agricultural proposals. And reviewers understand that a pound of nitrogen, phosphorus, or sediment is more expensive to remove in an urban setting than it is in an agricultural one. So when you think about cost effectiveness, the sector that you should be looking at is the sector that you're working in, right? So if you're looking at an urban project, and look at comparing the cost of your projects to other similar projects in the urban sector. Okay, next, I think we're ready for a poll. Okay, so this will test if what I said was clear. So NFWF wants to fund projects, and this is true or false. NFWF wants to fund projects that will reduce nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment loads, but also considers the relative cost of installing BMPs on a farm, for example, compared with installing BMPs in an urban setting. So go ahead and text true or false to that. Bravo. I like to see that. Okay. Katie Umbalski, take it away.
Thanks, Kristen. So now we're going to talk about a few other components that you should consider when writing your proposal. The first one is match. So you'll hear us talk about match as being very important. And the reason why, going back to what Kristen just was talking about, is that it represents buy-in by your project partners. And each grant, you have to make sure that you're clear when you are working through your proposal, that you know what the match requirements are for each grant. So for the grants that Jake went through earlier, we have the INSR grants. Those are the $1 million grants. They have a 1-to-1 match requirement. That means for every dollar that you request, you need to have $1 of match. So that's, if you go for the $1 million, you need $1 million of match. For the small watershed grants, you need a 1/3 match. And for planning and technical assistance grants, there's not a match requirement. So at a minimum, you need to meet those requirements. But if you are able to go over and above those minimums, it puts you in a little bit of a competitive advantage. But it's basically helpful for the foundation to know that they're not the only one, paying for the scope of your work. You're leveraging additional dollars, and you're demonstrating that other partners believe that your project is important because they're contributing to it. And when you have match from partners, what's really critical is that you document that. You ask them, when you're asking them for a letter of support, to mention that in that letter of support, so that it's not just you stating that they are contributing, but they're telling the reviewers as well. So let's look at an example. So if you were proposing to install a living shoreline project, and there's a local college that needs internship opportunities for their students, they might say, well, we can provide student interns, and they're available. They'll be able to give you 300 hours of service to inspect, maintain, and replant the project site over 2 growing seasons. So how do you reflect that in your grant proposal? How do you convey that to the reviewers? So it's important that you really, it's in the budget process when you're filling out that form. You have options to say that this match is secured or it's pledged. Because it's an in-kind service, it would be pledged because it's not cash in hand. You need to identify the value of that contribution, explain how did you come up with it? Are you paying a lawyer at $500 an hour because they're a lawyer to plant trees? Or are you paying a lawyer to plant trees for the cost of tree planting? So there's you can go online and look at, there's several government sites that will tell you what an acceptable volunteer rate is, and you want to identify the specific task, make sure that it's as comparable to your project as possible. So in this case, if you had 300 hours and you go on this website, then it's like IRS or Bureau of Labor and Industry, things, or agencies like that will have those rates. And in this case, for tree planting, $28.54 an hour is an acceptable volunteer rate. So you just do the math, and for those volunteers, those interns, to be providing tree planting services, you can claim $8,562 worth of match for your grant. That's a nice sizable amount that's meaningful. And so what you need to do is, when you're talking about your match that they're going to provide, you want to talk exactly what they're going to do and when they're going to do it during the scope of the project. And then again, that letter of support that you need to have from your partners. And when you're talking about match and your partners in the match section of the proposal, you want to make sure that you're reflecting that language in the narrative so that it's not just showing up as match. You want to talk about the project role, your partner roles in the narrative. Next. So Kristen also mentioned co-benefits. So when you are proposing your scope of work, and let's just use a buffer project as an example, you're doing this to improve water quality, but there's many other benefits that your project can have that are important to the foundation. It's just important how you talk about it. But first, just think about all the different benefits. You want to think about the ones that are most relevant, most important, most tangible when you're talking about co-benefits. So if you're talking about a buffer, you might be improving pollinator habitat in a meaningful way. You might be improving or creating new songbird habitat or other habitat for other species of special concern. So you can talk about those as co-benefits. If you have volunteers or interns, you might talk about the fact that you're engaging a certain sector of your community in your restoration efforts and educating them along the way. You might also talk about the fact that they're learning new skill sets and that they could be something that would benefit them in their future as they enter the workforce. Next slide. So the most important thing when you're talking about co-benefits is make sure that you keep the narrative of your grant squarely focused on your main purpose, which in this case would be improving water quality, maybe stabilizing stream banks with a new riparian buffer. But then you can talk about those co-benefits as added benefit, and they increase the competitiveness of your proposal. You just want to make sure that you don't water down your main purpose of your proposal and confuse a reviewer in that process. And you want to make sure that you're talking about that real, meaningful, tangible benefits. You don't need to come up with a laundry list, or a wish list of co-benefits that just waters down the overall intent. And it is important though to talk about it, because you don't want to assume that a reviewer understands that you're creating a riparian buffer on a stream that might be important to brook trout or freshwater mussels or other species of concern. You do want to convey that, just do it very quickly and concisely. So we have another slide. We want to talk about which outcomes does NFWF consider meaningful as co-benefits that might improve a proposal's competitiveness. And you can choose all that apply. And so you have choices here of A, creates 10 acres of pollinator habitat. B, reduces combined sewer overflows in an area where historically underserved people live. C, helps a municipality or a locality check a box on its municipal MS4 stormwater permit. Or D, engages new audiences in conservation and restoration with volunteer or educational opportunities. You want to pick all that apply. Just give it another couple seconds. Terrific. So those numbers went by quickly, but the correct answer was A, B, and D. And the reason why C is not considered a co-benefit is because it's the way it's written here is it helps a municipality check a box on its municipal stormwater permit. So NFWF doesn't prefer or care to help fund anybody who has to meet a regulatory obligation at its minimum level. However, if a municipality was going over and above those minimum requirements and really trying to get additional co-benefits to the work that they're doing, it might be something that is fundable. But in the way this is written, this is basically saying this is the minimum level. So there's really no co-benefits there. There's no additional benefit to the project that would be being proposed there. Next. So lastly, long-term maintenance. So again, using a buffer as an example, it's really important for reviewers and the foundation to know that their investment is going to be stewarded appropriately. So if you go in and you plant 10 acres of a riparian buffer, it's really important to understand how is this going to be maintained moving forward. So you want to talk about who and how the maintenance is, who's going to do that maintenance and how it's going to get done in the future. And everybody recognizes that during a term of grant, you can talk about that. Outside of that term, you might not have funding to continue, but we want to hear about your plans and to make sure that the investment that's being made is going to be sustained through time. Next. So before you hit that submit button, you want to make sure you have letters of support. It's not just about match. You want to have letters of support from partners saying this is a really sound project, it's strategic, and we support it. If they're going to be providing match, then you definitely want to have that articulated by your partner in their letter of support. Other attachments that might be helpful for reviewers are to see site photographs when there's going to be some kind of an intervention. We want to be able to see them before. It helps you state your case and why this project is important. So site photographs, design documents, if you have them at the time of submittal, and then certainly any required documents. So you want to make sure that you're really familiar with the RFP and that you're not omitting anything that is a required document, because that becomes a problem during the review process. And Liz, I think this is you. You may be muted. So maybe in absence, maybe Liz is having a technical problem. We want to know if there's anything new or interesting that you heard today that you didn't know before that was helpful and that might be meaningful as you think about a 2022 proposal.
Thank you, Katie. Very good. Appreciate that. So just take a minute here, just a couple seconds here to see how your thinking has developed, as you've heard from our field liaison team and from Jake with NFWF. Budget as an extension of the project story. Okay, loud and clear. Other thoughts there before we move on to our kind of a closing and we'll have a Q&A? That we should contact NFWF staff and field liaisons. Okay. KISS, keep it simple. Simple. Okay. 3 Ps, very good. All right, thank you very much for participating in our polls. We're going to move into our question and answer kind of discussion. I did see a few questions come up in the chat box. So let me advance the slides here. And yeah, so reach out to explore project ideas and discuss proposals, both with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, with Jake and Steph and Nicole, and the field liaison team. There should be in the chat box some contact information. Actually, we have contact information and a slide up ahead. I do want to point out that we have an opportunity for attendees at the workshop and others to participate in field liaison office hours. So we can schedule free one-on-one consultations with field liaisons, and this is an opportunity to, explore project concepts, grant alignment, eligibility, leveraging opportunities, and more. So I really encourage folks to sign up for office hours if that's of interest, if you have a project that you're considering and you want to explore it a little bit further. The opportunity to sign up is available through the WHOVA website as well. And you can reach out to any of us to schedule office hours, as well as using the Sign Up Genius link. We have contact information here for all the field liaison team members, as well as the NFWF staff. So make a note of that. And the presentation, the PowerPoint, will be available after the workshop, so you can have access to that information. It's also available on the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation website. Jake Riley mentioned the resources available, and that's another opportunity, another way to reach out and contact the team here. I know some questions came up. We have Stephanie Heidebretter on tap here to share any questions that came up in the chat box during the workshop. And certainly we invite folks to raise their hand and unmute. I'm going to just see if Stephanie Heidebretter is available to share any questions that came up.
Sure, Liz, thank you. We had a couple come in, but I thought it might be helpful to, because I don't think we addressed it, and maybe this is a question for Jake, to talk about our kind of general timeline for our 2022 programs to kick it off.
Yeah, great question. So really appreciate that. And we didn't include that in some of those earlier slides. So the short answer is that we will open our small watershed grants program probably sometime in early to mid-February. Apologies for the doggy in the background if you're hearing her. Somewhere around early to mid-February in 2022. Full proposals will be due sometime around, let's say, late April. NFWF will execute our grant reviews, we'll make our grant decisions at our August board meeting, and then shortly thereafter, folks will be notified. We have also, for folks that have been around the program for a couple of years, may have noticed that with our innovative program, we significantly shifted that this year. We moved that to a fall solicitation. We are planning to continue that in 2022. So the next solicitation for that innovative program is likely to open probably around early September of next year, with proposals due right around or just after Thanksgiving.
Great, thanks. There was also a question when you were going through the different scenarios, and somebody was asking what NFWF considers regional in scale for the Innovative Nutrient and Sediment Reduction Program.
That is the million-dollar question, and there's no right or wrong answer there, right? I think really kind of what we're trying to get at in terms of this concept of regional scale, right, is really working at increasingly larger geographic scales. And so we kind of sort of touched on that, kind of a showcase project, let's say a big stream restoration project, even if it's, 3/4 of a mile, tons of sediment benefits, that's really not a good fit for our innovative program, right? When we're talking about sort of regional scale, I think a way for folks to think about it is really kind of working at a scale that sort of necessitates things like partnership and collaboration to kind of deliver at scale, right? If you're able to do things sort of on your own and kind of your own sort of backyard, so to speak, you're probably not working at sort of the kind of scales that we're looking at here, because what we're really trying to get at is, again, sort of saturating the landscape with best management practices. And I think what we always tell folks is come to us, ask us. I think another way to think about this too is we certainly understand that quote unquote regional probably looks and feels different in more of an urban versus a rural context. So I think all things being equal, a smaller geographic area probably gets closer to sort of meeting that regional bar in an urban area than it does in a rural area. So.
We had another question that was somewhat answered in the chat, but some folks asking about the guardrails for match, and I might just read what's included in our RFP about match. So matching contributions consist of cash, contributed goods and services, volunteer hours, and or property raised and spent for the project during the period of performance. So somebody was asking for the timeline there. And then as our presenters noted, larger match ratios and matching fund contributions from a diversity of sources are encouraged and are a bit more competitive. Anything to add on that, Jake?
Nope, you said.
All right, and it looks like the only other question we had, and I'll let you tackle this one, Jake, any updates on our most effective basins program? And you might have to give some background for other folks on that.
Yeah, really appreciate that. So the quick background there is I mentioned that we were covering our big programs, kind of our key programs, but we also always sort of work in service to the Watershed and the Chesapeake Bay Program Partnership. And so we have a unique program very much focused just in Pennsylvania around this concept of most effective basins. And really sort of long and short is if you are working on ag conservation work in selected basins of Pennsylvania's Chesapeake Bay Watershed, this program may be for you. Would just point folks to nfwf.org/Chesapeake for an example of the 2021 RFP. It was the first year that we ran the program. We're finalizing plans right now for the schedule for that, but wouldn't be surprised, or I guess I should say, don't be surprised if that program comes out with a solicitation in late winter, early spring of next year. So I mentioned our SWIG program, maybe early to mid-February. Most effective basins might be something closer to, let's say, late February to early March in terms of when it would be released. So stay tuned for that. And we're also already in process doing some really good outreach work, or setting up some really good outreach work with partners in Pennsylvania, including PACD and others. So stay tuned for more information on that.
Great, thanks very much. Stephanie, were there any other questions? Or Ola, did you see any other questions in the Whova chat box or Q&A box?
No, I'm not seeing any other questions.
All right. If anybody wants to ask a question verbally and you have the capacity to take yourself off mute, we would welcome that right now. Thanks, Stephanie, for hosting Q&A, and for Jake for those efficient responses. Looks like we have 2 minutes before our workshop will officially end. Again, I don't see any hands raised. Ola or Stephanie, if you see a hand raised, we can take another question. Anything else anybody want to wrap up with? Any of our workshop team wants to kind of make as a final statement and for this workshop before I wrap up? All right, well, not hearing any. Not hearing any, I'm just going to close out the workshop. So thank you very much to the NFWF team for supporting the development of this workshop, including those front-facing folks who made presentations today, and those behind the scenes, including Nicole Thompson and Jenna Morris, who I may be on the workshop today, but she also were other team members who supported the development of the workshop. We really look forward to and would greatly appreciate feedback on this workshop session. It will benefit us going forward, and NFWF increasingly wants to reach out and do outreach across the Bay region to help applicants and build its applicant pool and strengthen proposals. So we encourage you to provide us with feedback, and we can make these kinds of training opportunities available depending upon where there are needs and interests. I just want to give Jake Riley an opportunity to say one final thing if he's interested or has a thought there.
I'll never turn down the opportunity to run my app here. No, I appreciate very much everyone's interest. Really appreciate Liz, you, the other field liaisons putting this together. I mentioned it maybe a little bit at the outset here. Also, if folks were paying attention to the plenary yesterday, NFWF is very, very interested in concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusion as it relates to our grants program. And this kind of presentation is exactly part and parcel of one of the things we want to do, which is make this program much more accessible to folks out there on the landscape. So really appreciate you joining. Certainly to Liz's point, if anything was unclear, if you have recommendations for us moving forward, let us know, because we will be taking this kind of thing on the road much, much more in the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining us.
All right, thanks, Jake. And provide your feedback through the Alliance Whova website, and we're going to close out the workshop. right on time. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye-bye.